Module 10, Oversight. Now, up until now, we've been looking at legal remedies and fairly traditional legal approaches to the regulation of the administrative system, which is a aggrieved individual seeks a remedy and goes through a process by which they obtain or fail to obtain that remedy. This week, we're looking at the systemic responses to some of the same issues and the kinds of oversight bodies that have been created as part of the administrative law system. And consistent with what we've been dealing with in this course so far, it's part of a systemic approach to administrative law and gives you, I think, an idea of the way law is evolving and changing away from being an avenue or a forum for people to hear grievances and more to a more pervasive and more complete governmental regulatory system. So this is not just an issue for administrative law, it's happening across the professional space. And people are much more likely to be working as law graduates in the regulatory environment than they are to be working in the traditional law firm style environments. And that's to do with a lot of things. It's to do with the way the profession's changing, the way society's changing, and also to do with the extremely high costs that we've seen that are related with legal proceedings. So one response is, of course, to try and pour more money into legal aid and to provide people with more access to process. Another response is to try and provide other ways of fixing the system. So there's several pieces of the system we'll look at in the materials for this week. We're going to focus first of all on commissions of inquiry, because they are the model or the template that a lot of other bodies are built on, and a lot of the other bodies have the same powers of commissions of inquiry. We're going to look at the Ombudsman's Office. We're going to have a little bit of a look at the way in which international law may provide a system of oversight, and we'll look at the whistleblowers protection schemes, which provide less of a protection than you might ordinarily think, but are at least go some way where there's a public interest issue to provide a remedy or a protection from people from being further persecuted. And we've seen quite recently a issue where the federal criminal law is being used to try and track down leaks around the NBN. And the situation there is, well, isn't that person a whistleblower? Aren't they blowing the whistle on government corruption and inequality and government inefficiency? And it'll be interesting to see how that particular one evolves, because the concept of protecting of whistleblowers hasn't come out of that environment. And the same thing we're also seeing in terms of people who are reporting on the conditions in offshore detention. And the priority there is still on prosecuting and chasing people who leak information, rather than discussion of why those people should be protected when they disclose that information in the public interest. Anyway, so there's some few things to look at there. There's an overall discussion at the beginning that I think is very important, and it's in the textbook as well, on the idea of an integrity branch of government. And this brings us back to some of those old issues that we discussed way back 10 weeks ago on separation of powers, and a suggestion that maybe these oversight bodies are something new that's evolving. And you'll see some support for that idea. You'll see some fear that that idea is something which is quickly turning into a very expensive industry with multiple layers of oversight and oversight of oversight stacking on top of each other. And you'll also see a certain resistance from members of the judiciary to the idea of there being an integrity branch of government, where they feel that that's the judge's role. And there's this seems to be quite challenging to some judges as well. So that discussion is quite interesting. And one of the things I think is interesting is that I think you can see admin law as something that's evolving and changing, and it's a space where even before you graduate there will be changes, and by the time, maybe in 10 years time, the domain will look quite different. So often we hit things in law where it's seen as very fixed, and things are in the past and things aren't changing and so on. But this is an area where seeing things change quite rapidly. And I can see in an era of WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden, we're not going to have people apply less pressure on government. In fact, we're going to see people have more demands for government accountability and transparency, and these are the mechanisms that may assist that. So have a look at the notes. I think you'll find the material on commissions of inquiry quite interesting, and it's certainly an area that requires a bit of background legal knowledge to understand, particularly in the way in which they operate, the way in which they acquire evidence, the way in which people who give evidence are protected or not protected, particularly the removal of the privilege against self-incrimination. There's lots of very interesting issues in commissions of inquiry, and it occupies a very interesting nexus in the public imagination between things that everyone knows about, because everyone knows there's a commission of inquiry, there are commissions of inquiry on, and every time someone is outraged about something, they demand that there be a commission of inquiry or a royal commission. Just a jurisdictional difference. So you get people know what they are in general, but they really don't know what they are and how they operate. And there's an interesting, I think, ambivalence here, where often people resist government intrusion, and I think for the right reasons, and people don't like government keeping tabs on them. They don't like filling out their census. They don't like being regulated. However, when things go wrong, they want Big Brother to step in and fix it. And that's what commissions of inquiry effectively are. They're an extremely powerful administrative body with a lot of power to dig up information, but they don't have, for very good reasons, the power to resolve those issues. They only have the power to make recommendations. Most famous commission of inquiry style body that did have power to determine was, I guess, the Spanish Inquisition. And that's the model we're not going for. We don't want a model where we hand a lot of unchecked power over to a body to be judge, jury, and executioner. But that's something which is not really in the public debate. So I think one thing you'll get out of this week, even if you never go anywhere near admin law again, is hopefully a knowledge of how these bodies operate, so that when in normal life people say to you, what's this commission of inquiry doing? Why aren't they fixing things? Why aren't they going in and kicking heads and making a change? You're able to hopefully address some of those issues and say to people, well, it's an issue of checks and balance on power, and do you really want something like the Spanish Inquisition to go in and fix those issues? Because they might be very effective at fixing those issues in some ways, but if they're not controlled and they do the wrong thing, you've got to be careful of who you give that power to and what they do with that power. So I don't imagine that's going to be a particularly scintillating Saturday night discussion down the pub anywhere, but at least I think you'll be able to address people's concerns and be able to fill people in who don't know. And I'm not really blaming the public for not knowing, because some of the rules and procedures around commissions of inquiry are quite technical. But at least you'll be in a position to say, well, the reason why these, pedophile priests haven't been thrown in jail yet is this, and this is why. And, the world will be a little bit smarter and a little bit better informed at the end of it.